Hey, I'm Coach T. This is week 48 of my C Sharp DevLog where I'm learning C Sharp in a year. We're very close to the end of the year at this point, and it's nice that even this late in the game, I'm still learning new stuff. And this week, I learned a bunch of new stuff. So, the last few weeks, if you're following along with the diary, we had house renovations going on, we had family stuff going on, and I just didn't get a lot of time to code. But I think maybe that refresher was needed. So, going into this week, I knew, hey, I'm going to have more time because my workload is rapidly coming to an end, which means that I'm going to have more brain space. So I filled that with more coding. And I've transitioned from that twin stick project to kind of exploring a small RTS project, which has meant that I had to learn to do input differently. I had to learn to do character composition differently. I had to learn to do state management differently. And that was a really productive, really constructive experience. So I started with what I knew. What does this project need? What can I build? And then I started mapping out next steps. And one by one by one, I started just crushing through them. So I showed off a little bit of the project the last time. Visually, it looks the same, but what's going on under the hood is completely different. And I will talk a little bit about what I've changed. And at some point, I want to sit down and make a video and show off the system because I think it's neat. I'm using Structs to pass along commands now. I'm using two different state machines, a primary state machine and a substate machine. I'm using generics. I'm using interfaces. I'm using a new design pattern, two actually, but I'm using primarily the command pattern, which I had never studied before. And I kind of just built it logically because I thought that would be the best way for these items, these objects to interact. And then as I was starting to hit some issues with my design, I looked it up, and out of the the C Sharp forum, whatever Reddit, I saw the word command pattern, and I was like, oh, I ought to look that up and see what that is. And it's very, very, very close to what I was implementing. And then later on, we were doing the same thing with how do we manage states based on characters' behavioral configurations. And I realized that we were working toward something called the trait pattern. So we're using two different design patterns now that we've never used before. I'm using them that we've never used before. We're using the observer and the strategy pattern for different things. And I'm starting to think about how do I compose the projects in terms of utilizing these patterns to build these particular features. And that has sped up my work and my thinking tremendously. So before I was very slow to build states. I like doing it. I like working with the state machines quite a bit. But it was difficult for me to map out what the next state should be. And this time, I was able to think kind of like a game designer, I guess, in the way that I have when I've built tabletop role playing games. I started thinking about what do I want the player or the character to be able to do? And those became action states. And then the follow up question is, okay, how do they get there? And that became a movement state. And so those are my two parallel or subordinated state machines. The action state machine determines, are you passive? Are you advancing towards something? Are you attacking something? Are you interacting with something? And I have a system now that figures out based on what the player has clicked on, whether it's a UI button or using the mouse to click on something or the gamepad to click on something, it tries a bunch of different methods. So I'm also using try methods as wrappers, and then those wrappers give the system a second to figure out what to do. And I've got some wrapper like states now as well. I don't know if that's a design pattern, but it was a strategy that worked. So, for example, when you click on an object, let's say you click on a computer console in the game, something that your character should go up to and beep boop click do something right in the back end, and all the player knows is that's a computer console. It looks like all the other computer consoles. It means I can do something with it. So the character then has to go, well, am I close enough to interact with it? Actually, let's back up a step. It goes, what did they just click on? I just received a click command, and it's passed along some information about this thing as a selectable object. That's the interface that I'm using. And the selectable object has some key character data. And it goes, okay, based on the type assigned to it, which is an enum, is it a console, is it a character, is it a piece of terrain, is it a mechanism, or is it an interactable object, or is it other? Based on that, I use a switch statement to go, oh, okay, try to do this, try to do this, try to do this, try to do this. So if it's if it's a console or a mechanism or whatever, it tries to interact with it, and it goes to the action state machine and it fires off a new struct, which is a command struct, and it goes, hey, I want you to interact. And the action state machine goes, am I close enough to interact? And if the answer is no, then it fires off to the move machine, goes, passes that command along and says, hey, we need to move to this thing's spot. In order to make that work, I also had to go back to some of my basic C# and relearn about overloading constructors. So I have 3 overloaded constructors for a command. One that is just a command, and that could be used for things like cancel, because it passes along no further information. Or it could be like reload, right, where it's just talking to the action state machine. And then there's another overload that has the command and a target object. So that could be for anything like advancing, for interacting, whatever, because you can get the location of something from the target. So you don't need to pass along any more information. And then also there is a third overload, which is the command and then just a vector 3 location. And that would be for something like move towards a spot or retreat to a spot. And so those 3 overloads, and I think the 8 different states that I have outlined or built already, and 5 different movement types, give me a ton of potential interactivity. And I've already seen some emergent unexpected behavior with just those states messing around with the cylinder kids, Larry, Curly, and Mo. So, like, for example, I have different behavioral configs now, and the only difference between them is one is aggressive and one is passive. And that determines how far are they going to chase each other when they see each other, how far are they going to pursue. That's one of the movement states. And without realizing it, as a designer, I had changed them. So I had Mo and Curly chasing Larry, and I forgot that Curly is defensive, I think. And so he just quit, and I was like, oh, I got to find a way to toggle Curly's posture to make sure that he stays aggressive, or else he's not going to behave the way that I want him to as a commander of these 3 knuckleheads. So it's not a huge emergent behavior. It didn't look up at me and say why, but it was not an expected behavior, which was a nice little surprise. It's complex enough that it can surprise me. So let's flip over real quick. I've already talked for 8 minutes. I canted this thing to the side just to make it look a little bit different because I was looking at it so much. Whoops, 1 second.